Hello, good evening to you. The Prime Minister has denied that the package of substantial tax cuts expected in tomorrow's pre-budget report is a gamble. He's insisted that action to boost spending is necessary and responsible. A cut in VAT is to be among the measures.
But the critics say families and businesses will face a tax bombshell in the future to pay for the cuts. Our political correspondent Ben Wright reports.
This afternoon, the Treasury team met to give a glimpse of their report. Many of the details are still secret, but one thing is certain. Tomorrow's pre-budget report will be one of the most important financial statements the government has ever made. At number 10, the Prime Minister explained why he believed a so-called fiscal stimulus plan was needed now. A huge package of tax cuts is on the cards as ministers try and pump money quickly into the economy.
My argument is, and every other country now accepts this, every continent is taking the same thing, is you've got to give real help to businesses and families now. Not to give real help now would cause more damage later, but the stimulus we give, and that's real help for business and family, has got to be temporary, it's got to be timely, and it's got to be targeted, and that's what it will be.
So what's likely to be in tomorrow's pre-budget report? There will be a 2.5% cut in VAT. That's a fast way of encouraging people to spend. There could be money to help low-income earners, more help for people who lost out from the scrapped 10p tax rate, perhaps. The Chancellor may also be tempted to postpone the rise in vehicle excise duty for another year. But what goes out must come back. The government's debt next year could be as high as £100 billion, and that's going to mean higher taxes later on. And that's the Conservatives' criticism of the government's plan. They've proposed new policies too, but say tax cuts now are unaffordable.
My worry is that if you have temporary tax cuts followed by large permanent tax increases, that actually says to people, this is not a stimulus, this is actually a warning about a big tax bombshell.
The Lib Dems favour tax cuts but say they should be permanent and targeted at the poorest families.
We prefer a different approach, which is more targeted on people who really need it. And we believe that people on low incomes, low wages should get an income tax cut, lifting thresholds or reducing the rate. And that's a much better way of concentrating resources where it needs it.
Will the government's plan work? It will be some time before we can tell whose reasoning was right. Tomorrow will be a day of drama here at Westminster. The government will spell out its plans for reviving a sick economy and explain how money given out in tax cuts can be paid back. The Conservatives say it's the wrong medicine. For political reputations and the economy, there's much at stake. Ben Wright, BBC News, Westminster.
While if the Chancellor does cut VAT as expected, what will the reduction actually mean for consumers? Here's our business correspondent, Joe Lynham.
The Chancellor hasn't confirmed it yet, but it's increasingly likely that VAT rates could be coming down from 17.5% at the moment to 15%. Because consumer spending accounts for 2/3 of the economy, Alistair Darling wants us to spend more now so that the impending recession won't be worse in the future.
It's a relatively attractive tax to cut if you're trying to stimulate the economy in the short term. If you were to, for example, cut income tax instead, one of the concerns would be that people would go out and save the proceeds.
So what would a dramatic cut in VAT look like? Well, you'd pay just over £5 less on a 22-inch flat-screen TV, you'd save £13 a year on a monthly mobile phone bill of £50, and a typical Ford Mondeo might soon be almost £400 cheaper. Those kind of savings went down well with some shoppers today.
I need to do something. Yeah, very good.
It means there'll be more money to be spent, so I hope you'll get the economy moving again so that we can all enjoy some better news in the new year.
I don't think 2.5% is going to make much difference, to be honest. I think there are other things they could do. So I don't think it'll make a difference to our spending habits.
But the largesse which is expected in the pre-budget report also comes with a major health warning. Because the Chancellor might have to borrow up to £100 billion to pay for these tax cuts, he might also announce future tax rises. That's why it's already being called the boomerang budget. Joe Lynham, BBC News.
Well, Andrew Teachers from the British Property Federation, he's with us now. Good evening.
Hi, Chris.
What does the property industry hope for?
Well, the one big thing we're hoping for tomorrow is for a cut in empty rates, and that refers to the tax on empty properties that the government brought in last April in a bid to raise a bit of cash to fill the holes in the budget. So essentially what they did in April, they cut the business rate relief for empty shops, offices and factories, and that means that if you've been hit by the recession and you've got an empty property, you've got to pay full business rates on it, even if you've not got a tenant and you're not earning any money. So it's the equivalent of making the unemployed pay income tax, because you're charging tax on something that's not making any money for its owner.
If you got your way, what difference would it make?
Well, it would actually save a lot of small firms from going under. It would save a lot of big firms from having to demolish property, and it would be a real kind of knee up for a lot of people. And we've heard Gordon Brown going on today about wanting to help families and help businesses, but if that's really the case, then we need to actually see things that are really going to help, rather than just, you know, a lot of fanfare, a lot of bluster around the papers. And this tax has been very much opposed by all sides. We've seen about 120 MPs come out and sign petitions against it in Parliament. We've also got an online petition called Empty Threat on the Number 10 website. This has seen over 5,000 people come out in support of the campaign.
So you're fairly confident?
Well, we're not putting the champagne on ice just yet. You know, we've not really seen any signs so far that the government has actually listened. You know, we've had Hazel Blears, the Community Secretary, continuing to say that this has been done for the good of business. Similarly, Lord Mandelson, the Business Secretary, has come out and said a similar thing in the last couple of weeks, and you know, much to the fury of businesses right across the country. So we are going to have to wait and see, but it is obviously something vital that needs to be done if the government is really serious about helping businesses.
Do you worry, though, that whatever's done tomorrow will be undone in a year or two's time because of the need to pay the bill?
Well, the thing is with empty rates is that there's a much bigger, longer-term cost. You know, charging tax in the short term might raise £1 billion, but the jobs that are going to be lost by people being put out of business, the regeneration schemes being shelved by firms not being able to develop, are far wider. And whilst it's really difficult to actually put a cash sum on the cost of it right now, we're pretty certain that the longer-term costs of empty rates are going to be far higher than the amount they might raise in the short term.
I mean, how many firms are affected by this, roughly?
Well, thousands. I mean, every firm, every firm in the country will be affected in some way, not necessarily if they've got properties themselves, but simply by the added cost of development. Because when you're building something, it's never going to be totally full right from the beginning. So if you're a developer regenerating a deprived area, you've got to factor that cost in to the development. And what people are simply saying is, in the current market, they're just simply not going to bother, because everyone's margins are squeezed really due to the tightened credit markets. And if there's an extra cost on development, such as, you know, a charge on empty property, people are just going to hold back and not develop at all, and that's going to hit small businesses, because the supply of property is something vital to small businesses. If you're a small business, when you want to set up a new firm, a new business, you want to move into premises, you need those premises to be available. You need a supply of property, you need flexible space, and empty rates is something which is really hurting that.
Yes, I mean, very briefly, many people we've spoken to have had a shopping list of things they want tomorrow. You're quite specific. It's one particular thing which would make an enormous difference.
That's the biggest thing, I think. You know, there's a raft of other quite technical things that the property industry would like to see regarding things like real estate investment trusts and moves to really help large investment in housing. But I think, you know, these are things that we're working on in the longer term. Empty rates is the big thing that we've been campaigning for over the last year or so, and I think that's the number one vital thing that the government really needs to change if it's going to prove what it's been saying about wanting to really help business.
OK, thanks, Andrew. Andrew Teacher from the British Property Federation. Thanks for coming in.